What's going on, everyone, and welcome back. This is To Be Continued With, and today we're going to cover the second Marvel and Disney Plus streaming show that will soon be gearing up for its second season, and more importantly, introduce us to the MCU's next big threat. That's right, today we're covering Loki, which stars Tom Hiddleston, Owen Wilson, along with Sophie DiMartino, and introduces us to Jonathan Majors, He Who Remains, who's a variant of Kang the Conqueror. Now, this series takes place right after Marvel's Phase 3. It sets up some important aspects for Phase 4 and will shake things up in a crazy way for Phase 5 and beyond. So sit back, relax, let's cue up that intro and get things started. As always, I want to say thanks to everyone returning to the channel. And if you're new here, let me say welcome. And more importantly, if you enjoy what's going on here, I'm going to ask for a little bit of support by asking you to subscribe and hitting that bell for future episode notifications. Also, please don't forget to like and share this video, and also leave a comment because I'd love to know what you think. Now, this Loki series starts off when the Avengers team travels back in time during Avengers Endgame in order for them to defeat Thanos and bring back half the universe that was blipped out of existence back in the day. Remember? You have to. It was a billion-dollar movie. Specifically, it's the year 2012 when we see what happens after the Avengers win the battle for New York, and we find out that the Hulk hates stairs. He also ends up presenting a captured Loki with the perfect excuse to escape with the Tesseract, and he does. He ends up in the Mojave Desert only to be tracked down and captured by TVA agents. Now, the TVA stands for the TimeVarianceAuthority, and they police and maintain what's called the Sacred Timeline. What's a Sacred Timeline, you ask? Well, think about it like this. It's a perfect timeline. You see, with Loki changing his fate by escaping, he's now considered a variant that has created a new timeline, which in turn creates an alternate universe to the one we know. The TVA does exist, but they exist outside of time and space. And it's here that Loki, like us, are basically shown that there was once a multiversal war which was actually saved by 3 timekeepers. And now their purpose is to keep things in check. What they did was create a weird DMV type office complete with office staff, security guards, judges, and a tour guide named Miss Minutes, who's an AI program voiced by the talented Tara Strong, who you may know as the voice of Harley Quinn. Now, this place corrects multiversal mistakes and erases, or more to the point, prunes any variants or timelines that should not exist. Owen Wilson plays an analyst for the TVA named Mobius, and as he sits in on Loki's case, where Loki tries to place blame on the Avengers for his current predicament, he finds out that that was actually supposed to happen. Some interesting things to take note about the TVA is that magic doesn't work here, nor do things like the Infinity Stones, which are actually used by some of the staff members as paperweights, which confuses the shit out of Loki even more. Now, Mobius shows Loki how things should and do play out by showing him clips of This Is Your Life, and it actually catches the God of Mischief off guard. A sample of Loki's greatest hits shows how he was defeated by the Avengers. Another one shows that he was actually D.B. Cooper, who in real life was a person that was never caught after he hijacked a plane and demanded $200,000 in 1971. Go Google it. Now, he's also shown the events that took place in the MCU that he has not experienced or gone through yet. Events all the way from Thor the Dark World to his eventual death in Infinity War. Now, Loki does manage to escape a situation, only to be shell-shocked to find out that he's really been captured and he's in a place where he might not be able to get out of. It's at this point, though, that Mobius has a real heart-to-heart with Loki and makes him an offer about redemption by asking him to help out on another case. That other case just so happens to be a variant of Loki. It's stated that this particular variant has escaped the TVA on multiple occasions, which is why he's brought on board. It seems that this variant Loki is not only outsmarting the TVA throughout various times, but also taking some of the TVA's tech and along with kidnapping one of their officers. The series starts off as a buddy cop type with Wilson's Mobius and Hiddleston's Loki, but the major difference is, or actually the major thing is, that no one trusts Loki, and it's obvious as to why, which is actually pointed out by Ravonna Renslayer, the head judge at the TVA. The problem for the TVA is that Loki is pretty damn smart when it comes to knowing himself and becomes an asset in figuring out how to help with the case. He first figures out that his variant is choosing events that are supposed to end in destruction so they don't create Nexus events to make a move, since it doesn't register to the TVA. Also, as an FYI, a Nexus event is an alteration to the timeline that can destroy all of reality. Now, they end up testing a theory in Pompeii in 79 AD when they visit Mount Vesuvius. And Loki is right, because he warns everyone there about what's going to happen, and nothing about this registers on the TVA's radar. From there, they pinpoint a possible lead or an apocalyptic event that takes place at a Roxxon store, which is pretty cool because Roxxon is actually an evil corporation in the comics. And they get there, and once they do, the TVA officers split up, and Officer B-15, who's teamed up with Loki, ends up getting possessed by Loki's variant. The other team ends up finding that lost officer, and she is completely shaken up, has no idea what's going on, and is rambling about giving up the Timekeeper's locations. With both Lokis now having a one-on-one, they share what they're looking to accomplish with the variant Loki, body hopping from different people that are at that store. And he states that he's just looking to destroy and eliminate the TVA, which intrigues our Loki because they end up fighting, and our Loki, the one we know and love, wants to know more and comes face to face with his variant's true self. And it just so happens to be a female version of him who activates the TVA's weapons against them. Now, they both end up escaping, and we're shown how the variant Loki was extracting information from that scared TVA officer that I just mentioned a little while back. They showed in a flashback that she used some sort of mind trick, mind meld, on the officer to get info. Very little info, sporadic. At this point, we see both Lokis have escaped back to the TVA headquarters where Sylvie, that's the name of the female variant and what she goes by, she's actually making her way towards the Timekeepers. Now, they get cornered by Ravonna, only to escape again. This time, though, they escape to a doomed planet in the year 2077. Now, they've been using a Tempad, which is a device used by the TVA to travel to different locations in time. But it's out of juice, and they're left to their own devices, cunning, wit, and powers to get off this doomed planet. Now, to keep things simple, Loki and Sylvie need to sneak aboard a train that's headed to the Ark. The Ark is a ship that's actually helping people on this doomed planet get off. That sounded weird. But anyway, during this time, they actually start understanding each other and even start feeling something for each other, which creates a weird Nexus event that the TVA definitely takes notice of. They reach the Ark, but all hell breaks loose. The planet starts to crumble, along with meteors falling from the sky onto the damn planet, and it even takes out the Ark ship, which they were trying to get on. We end up catching up with Mobius and Ravonna back at the TVA, and they discuss the danger that reality is in due to the event that Loki and Sylvie created. But we're also shown how Sylvie ended up entangled with the TVA through another flashback. It seems that when Sylvie was young, she was actually heroic in nature and wanted to be a Valkyrie when she grew up, which is not the path for someone who's supposed to grow into a mischievous, evil goddess. Now, while we are shown this, Sylvie is explaining it to Loki during their final moments on that doomed planet, only to be located by the TVA and brought back in at the last minute. Now they're prisoners of the TVA again, but Loki gets placed in a time loop cell, which actually ends up replaying an actual Norse story about a time when Loki cut off Lady Sif's hair. Mind you, before he was placed in this loop, he explains to Mobius that something isn't right with the TVA and informs him, "You're being played, dude. So's everyone else here." Now this gets Mobius, and it really gets to him. I mean, he ends up pulling him out of the time loop cell and starts having another one-on-one, wanting to learn more about the lies that the TVA is built upon. The reason Mobius is starting to have these doubts and believe in him is due to the never-before-seen Nexus event that he and Sylvie created. Loki states that Mobius and everyone at the TVA are also variants that have been lied to and made to be puppets of the Timekeepers. Mobius tells Loki that Sylvie was pruned, but in reality, she's just made a prisoner again, and since he is still on the fence on what to believe, Mobius does a bit of investigating himself, which only proves that Loki was actually telling the truth. Go figure. Now, he takes a leap of faith and offers Loki to work with him on freeing Sylvie, only to be confronted by Ravonna, and then Mobius gets pruned. Mobius is gone. Loki recaptured, reunited, and with Sylvie. But they also prepare to enter the chamber of the Timekeepers with Ravonna this time out. And the Timekeepers are straight out of the comics, and right at the moment when they're about to prune Loki and Sylvie, B-15 comes in and saves them, because earlier Sylvie showed the truth to B-15 about her life before the TVA took her. Now, they fight with the guards once B-15 takes their neck shackles off, and they fight ends with Sylvie beheading one of the Timekeepers. Problem is, Timekeepers are complete fakes. I mean, listen, they're animatronics, which makes Loki, Sylvie, and Ravonna, along with us, who the hell is pulling the strings here and what's going on? Kind of like the whole Wizard of Oz ending, but we still don't know who's actually behind the curtain. Now, while Loki and Sylvie share a moment, we see Loki get pruned by Ravonna, and this really sets things up for even stranger things to happen, because next up, we see what really happens to Loki and anyone else that gets pruned out of existence. Now, most folks complain about the Marvel shows and how they have a decent or a slow start, only to have the last 2 episodes being crammed with action, explanations, and all-out coolness. And with this being the second Marvel show that they put out, it's really the one that solidified that feeling, because with Loki being pruned, we see that he's actually transported to a wasteland full of comic book Easter eggs, like Yellow Jacket's helmet from the first Ant-Man movie. Hell, we even see an Avengers Tower with the name Kang on it, just spelled a little bit differently, and the infamous Thanos helicopter from the comics. But the coolest things here are the other Loki variants. I mean, Kid Loki, Alligator Loki, and Classic Loki, who is dressed exactly like the comic book character and played by the actor who inspired it. The actor, Richard E. Grant. Hell, listen, there's even a Throg, who is the frog version of Thor from the comics. Now, the Wasteland is called the Void, and everything that's pruned ends up here, only to be chased and then fully destroyed by a creature named Alioth. Alioth is a cloud-like creature that is a living tempest, and it ensures that nothing survives in the Void once it gets there. Now, Loki and all the variants I mentioned, along with the boastful Loki, are led by Kid Loki, because in his timeline, he was able to kill Thor, which was actually his Nexus event that got the attention of the TVA. And speaking of the TVA, let's head back over there, because Ravonna is stalling for time against Sylvie, with the help of Miss Minutes. Remember that AI program that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode? Anyway, they set up Sylvie, which forces her to prune herself as the only way out for her. At this point, we go back to the Lokis, and they're all telling each other what was their Nexus event, which is great and a funny interaction, but then gets interrupted by another variant, President Loki, along with his crew of merry men, and they are simply there to take out all the others. Now, while this is going on, Sylvie is trying to not get caught by Alioth and is saved by Mobius. But long story short, this is a great episode in this particular series, because the gist of this episode is to have Sylvie, Mobius, and Loki back together again. But it's actually the standout episode for me, due to all the Easter eggs and the build-up towards the big finale. I mean, what's not to love, since in this episode, we see the classic Loki sacrifice himself so that Loki and Sylvie can take down Alioth and discover what's beyond the void, which leads to our last episode. Now, we see here that Loki and Sylvie are now at the end of the sacred timeline. To be more specific, they are at a castle which is home to He Who Remains, a variant of Kang who we will see in the upcoming Ant-Man and Wasp Quantumania movie. Miss Minutes greets them and informs them that he would like to meet with Loki and Sylvie and offer them the deal of a lifetime. Now, Jonathan Majors is great as He Who Remains and will no doubt be an amazing Kang. But at this point, I'm getting ahead of myself because they are completely different characters. Or should I say they're variants of themselves? Now, while Mobius and Agent B-15 start spreading the truth throughout the TVA, we get back to the story, or actually, we actually get the backstory of He Who Remains. Basically, he is a variant who's worked with his other variants in ways that give him knowledge of everything that's ever happened and will ever happen to a certain point. Now, he explains that a multiversal war did take place where he came out on top of all his other variants. And then he rewrote all the time in reality so he could create one timeline that worked in his favor. He makes an offer to Loki and Sylvie and dangles it over their heads. But since Loki is untrustworthy and Sylvie simply can't trust anyone, it does put them in a bit of a bind. If you don't know, He Who Remains is a very charismatic individual from the 30th century who discovered and weaponized Alioth and created the TVA in order to control the timeline. Now, he does mention that he may seem evil, but that is nothing compared to his variants that are truly evil, and they're dead set on conquering all. He offers Sylvie and Loki an offer to kill him, which will either open up a can of worms where everything he's created is destroyed and can unleash a multitude of his variants on reality, or they can simply take over as the new custodians of the sacred timeline. You see, he's tired and old, and he's just looking to retire by having them keep the timeline intact and have them run the TVA. Now, you're probably wondering, well, doesn't he know how things end if he, has been there? Yes, he does, but there is a point, or should I say a threshold, where things are no longer known to him. We actually see the multiverse start to branch off once they pass that point, and he's ready to accept what happens next. See, if he dies, everything begins to unravel. It simply happens again, and he ends up in the same spot. Now, it might not be him, or it might be a worse variant or a better variant that takes over. But Loki and Sylvie are at a crossroads about what to do, but He Who Remains points out that they need to hurry due to the timeline branching off so many different timelines that things are actually falling into utter madness. Now, they fight while He Who Remains watches on, but Sylvie sends Loki back to the TVA and straight up kills He Who Remains by stabbing him. The TVA is in complete disarray. Loki finds Mobius and then starts explaining what's going on and what's possibly going to happen, but Mobius tries to calm him down. The reason why? Mobius has no idea who Loki is, and Loki actually goes from being scared about what's going to happen, because right at that particular moment when he's about to snap, he looks over and he notices that there used to be a statue of the Timekeepers at the center of the TVA, but now it's replaced with a statue of Kang the Conqueror. The series ends here, and it's one of the best shows that Marvel has ever put out. Now remember, we'll get to see Jonathan Majors pop up again as Kang in the new Ant-Man movie Quantumania, as well as, here's a big spoiler for everyone, but we also get to see Loki and Mobius in that movie as well, because they're in the post-credit scene, which show an actual clip of Loki Season 2. Now, things will also get batshit crazy, because not only does Kang return in Quantumania, but this is a big time spoiler. Jonathan Majors also shows up in another post-credit scene in that movie as other variants from the comics, specifically Rama-Tut, Immortus, and one that might be his Scarlet Centurion variant, which are all from the comics. Oh, and we also see the Council of Kangs. They actually recreate this classic scene from the Fantastic Four comic. So make sure your arms and legs are inside the vehicle until it comes to a complete stop, because the future of the MCU is heading towards complete craziness. It's going to be batshit. I mean, Avengers 5 is titled Kang Dynasty, Avengers 6 is titled Secret Wars, and it revolves around what starts here. The interesting thing that I want to know is if the MCU Kang is related to Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four, just like in the comics. And that's just in case you didn't know that. If you do, now you know. Now, time travel alone can really be a mindfuck, and adding the multiverse to it can only make things even a wilder ride. So be ready to what's coming next. Now, as I mentioned, this series has Easter eggs galore. They were a blast for me as well, and the story was great. I just wish that Marvel would spread the coolness throughout their shows so that the last couple of episodes are not crammed with so much coming at us in those last 2 episodes. Do me a favor. Please make sure you see Quantumania. I did. It's phenomenal. Make sure you watch it to see what happens next. And also, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell so you can be notified on our coverage of Quantumania coming up, along with future episodes on movies and shows that we will cover here. Also, don't forget, check out BobCattTheLegend and everything that he does, because whether it's in this universe or anywhere throughout the multiverse, his beats will always be bangers. Thanks again, folks, for checking us out. And even though this is the end of our Loki Season 1 breakdown on this channel, things go on because it's simply to be continued with.